Hello, welcome back to See What Sticks, a podcast in tandem with Hollywood Casting and Film. I'm Russell.
I'm Arianna.
I'm Vinay.
And I'm Nick.
So, we have another special guest. Actually, we have two special guests today, besides myself and Arianna, Vinay and Nick. Would you guys like to take it away for this shorter episode?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Nick, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're thrilled to have you, and we're excited to be working with you on a short film that we're collaborating together with you on. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Great. As we get started, I think our members, our Hollywood Casting and Film members out there, we've just let them know that we're casting your film, Literal Revolution. I read it the other day. I loved it. I thought it had a lot of topical relevancy. And the thing I really loved about it is it's a story with a message, but you manage to work in a lot of comedy as well. And not very many writers can do that. So I thought it was a special piece, and so all of our members will look forward to submitting to that online. As we get started, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you're originally from Scotland, and you worked as a playwright in London, but if you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up in Los Angeles.
Yeah, certainly. So, yes, and to your listeners as well, there is going to be a bit of a Scottish accent on this call. If you guys stop understanding me, just wave frantically at the screen, and I can tone it up or down. So we can work on that. But yeah, I've had an unusual journey through the industry to this point. As you mentioned, I began back in Scotland initially as a journalist. I used to write for a Rupert Murdoch paper, incredibly briefly, long enough to find out that journalists are pretty horribly compensated for all of the very good and hard work that they do. And being a creative person and finding ways to tell stories differently was something that always appealed to me. So I have enormous respect for journalists, and journalism still informs a lot of my work. But I must admit, I bailed out. I took a side door into satire, and then by way of the theatre, and yes, I started off writing plays for the Edinburgh International Fringe Festival, which comes through my town and is right at the end of my street. So I had the opportunity to stage a couple of plays there. One of which was picked up, got some press, and was nominated by Amnesty for one of the theatre awards that they have. And then off the back of that, we got a transfer to London, and it was staged at the Tara International Theatre down there. It was also a satire, like the project that I've been bringing to you guys, mm-hmm. And from that moment on, I followed it to London, and then the very strange sideways parts of my career began. What I always found was that the people that were ready to work with me and ready to do business right from the get-go, back when I was less experienced, mm-hmm. It was always people who had a slightly sideways relationship with the industry. And also at this time, the industry in London was very white and not that diverse at all. And the theatre that brought my play down it had Bangladeshi roots. And from having done that work, I landed reasonably quickly my first job in TV and film, which was writing cartoons for a Bollywood company.
Oh wow!
So my orientation shifted very quickly to writing internationally, and on the back of those series and then the features based on them, I embarked on this strange international career. My second job was in Nigeria. I went there with a project. My third was in Lebanon, and then I came crafted this reputation as somebody that was interested to go to places, to work with people that had stories to tell, and then to find ways to bring those to bring those projects to fruition, bring them to the screen.
Right.
So yeah, that was the beginning of it, and project led to project, and I ended up arriving in Los Angeles about 3.5 years ago with some movies under my belt, and going from there.
That's fascinating. As you're going from London to Nigeria to, did you say Lebanon?
Yeah.
Or, are you, is your career in journalism, is that informing your career? Are you writing politically based plays for the most part, or is it, are you sort of exploring different genres at that point?
You know what? It's completely different. My interest in projects tends to stem from that. So, for example, the Nigerian project that I was brought over on was about oil piracy. Mm-hmm. So it was a very hot journalistic subject at the time. The play that I'd written previously was about it was about freedom of expression as relates to religion. So it was a very a subject that required a lot of care in dealing with. Right. But then I've engaged in some quite complex things. From like for example, I was once commissioned to do a play based on the poetry of Saddam Hussein, if you can imagine that.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I was commissioned for a feature by basically the rebel groups that brought down Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, and developed that piece with them, working very closely with them to do that. But equally, I've also done, my biggest piece is a fairly straightforward biopic movie that I did with Warner Brothers, which was more as a producer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been a mix. I love projects that have something to say, but equally, I'm a sci-fi nut. I love fantasy, and being a writer under commission for these different projects. I don't write a lot on spec. I tend to find people that have interesting stories and want help to find a way to tell them and to express them in the form of a screenplay, and right. And I fill that void for them and provide that means by which those projects can reach the market. Right.
I think a lot of writers I know, they start off as novelists or journalists and then end up in storytelling one way or the other. And so I think a lot of people are curious. Obviously, you have a very storied background as a journalist and as a playwright. But when you come to LA, you've obviously worked on this feature film, The Man Who Knew Infinity. How did you get hooked up with that project? Did you meet people through playwriting, or was it a chance encounter?
It wasn't. I think one of the things that for me has always been very important in how I relate to the business is you can't just be one thing. And especially with the very kind of grassroots projects that I started working with, once the script is done, that project then needs to be produced. That project needs to be financed, and so as in tandem with improving my craft as a writer and as a screenwriter in particular, I was also for better or worse getting involved in productions, and I started to just very specifically understand how the financial aspects of a screenplay. A screenplay at its best is a document that is designed to solicit funding for an idea. It goes along with the treatment and everything else. So building that expertise and learning to write treatments and everything else, to come back to your question, that was how I got onto Infinity, because because Infinity is the story of Srinivasa Ramanujan, who's a famous Indian mathematician. The Indian connections that I built in the business from my time there actually went into facilitating offers of funding for that project, which some came to fruition and some didn't, but that put me into the sphere of operation of that project, and then my role there evolved to handle specific on-site, producing responsibilities for the project in the United Kingdom, while the rest of the team were coming over from the States. And I owe so much to those guys, to Jim Young, the producer, and to Matt Brown, the director, who really, they on a very complicated and high stress production, took the time to take me under their wing and taught me a lot about about Hollywood and about how everything worked, and I was able to take that professional kindness and turn it into, scale my career up to the level where I could come to LA and do projects here.
Right.
So,
and it sounds like your whole career, you've managed to write pieces that are politically meaningful. They make a statement, but they keep you entertained throughout the story. Is that something you've always been able to do? And, kind of pivoting to literal revolution as well. Do you see, are you trying to make a feature out of that? I know you mentioned to me that it's definitely a topical piece. It might go viral given the subject matter and having everything topical. But what is your vision for that short film? And is it reflective of most of the work you've done in your career?
It is and it isn't. I think because a lot of the work that my motives and my interests personally are very much led by the stories that are important in the world in that moment. It can sometimes be a challenge to write about the now, because especially in this day and age, the now shifts faster than we can try and keep up. But honestly, even just if you take 2020, the world has completely redefined, and especially in the world of feature film, you're talking about an environment where the road to making a feature is a very, very slow one. Mm-hmm. So anything I was working on that had a political bent in 2019, to try and bring that out in 2020 is crazy. So one of the things that I found attractive about the opportunity is that this is a short, and it can be realized in as close to real time as the film industry ever gets.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's partly that. I mean, the as far as literal revolution is concerned, the many of the elements, the shirts that people wear with the political slogans on them, a number of them are in my house. My wife is African American, and as is my business partner in Behind the Billboards, which is the TV development company that I run here in LA. Mm-hmm. With my partner Yul Case. So the kind of political discourse and just everyday discourse in my house has been so colored by the impact of everything that's been going on, in the country, all of the recent events, and honestly, the situation for African Americans prior to that is something that I live. I'm about to have my first child. My daughter is going to come into this world, and she's going to be, she's going to be mixed, and she's going to have an experience of this country that is profoundly different, even to the experience that I have. Mm-hmm. And I'm a foreigner, I'm not even from here,
right.
But in some ways my rights, unless things change markedly and quickly, are going to be, I'm going to have more rights than she does. And
right.
that really disturbs me. And that motivates me to go out and, that I'm not, there are many things that I'm not good at, but one of the things that I can do is write and create projects. And, this, in order to bring about change, everybody has to do what they can do in the way that they can do it best. And for me, that is writing, serious and projects based on important ideas, but also with that twist of satire that allows for an idea that might be scary to some people to be ingested in a different way.
So at this point in the show, we are going to open up the floor a little bit to another host on the show, and start to talk about how this film can impact us with Hollywood casting and film and help with, one, like you were saying, the nearly one-to-one scale of pitching a project and having it made as quickly as you can right now, and sort of some of the advantages of having a smaller crew and really working hands-on with the writer to make a project that is exactly what they want or is close to exactly what they want. So we're going to open up the floor here in one moment. So let me go do that. Okay.
So, Nick, as I was reading your short script, Literal Revolution, I thought to myself, it had a lot of potential. It had a lot of ability to get people's attention because, I think for the longest time with the short film industry, things get kind of pigeonholed as a cause film or, something trying to make a statement. And a lot of those films are great, but they maybe lose the entertainment value or the narrative thread that you need in order to have a successful story in general. And the thing that struck me about your script was that I was entertained throughout the entire reading, and yet it remained powerful. You were managing to say things, with every piece of dialogue. And that's primarily why I think I'm excited to shoot this. And just to give you a little background, can you tell our audience just kind of a brief synopsis of the story you've written? And then also, as we cast this at Hollywood Casting and Film, what sort of performances are you looking for when we start auditioning actors for the project?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to give it my best. I mean, it should probably be said that this will be a little bit like explaining a joke to somebody, which will mean that it is neither funny nor charming in the language that I'm about to give it to you. But yeah, I can do my best. It comes from a very simple idea, and it's just something that occurred really within my own house. We have various kind of pieces of we want to call them protest paraphernalia. The kind of the different whether it's a button pin or a badge or a T-shirt or whatever, that we have a certain amount of those things around because we are kind of we're politically engaged with what's going on, and especially when it comes to the question of of civil rights. It's as I mentioned, it's I'm in a multi-ethnic household, and those things are important to us. But when you're there and you're literally holding in your hand a badge that says "Stand with Black Women," there's something in the latent sort of silly literal comic part of my brain that actually just makes me want to kind of go and stand next to my wife and stare at her oddly, and then wait for her to move, and then go and stand next to her again. And it kind of started just with doing that, and that gave me hours of endless entertainment, which probably says terrible things about my maturity levels as a human being. But from that idea, it made me think a lot about slogans. And about the really important and profound slogans that are now being deployed to try and change the world, and finding ways to give those a different platform and a different means by which they can impact people. Because I know as well that there's right now there are movements for there are massive and profound movements for change that are underway. And as somebody who is trying to engage with them, and especially trying to engage with them as a white person as well, and as a white foreigner at that, it can become difficult to decode. And so for me, this was an opportunity to try and find a way that that people who instinctively want to support the things that are being argued for, who want to support civil rights, who want to support equality, can pick an understanding that isn't necessarily couched on first-person primary experience of those things. So to just tell you briefly the story, you have a guy, Dave, and he's a quite a closeted individual, white guy. Works in tech, probably, very, very focused on the things that he has to do, and he's there as this experience is unfolding around him, and he has, as many of us do, he has a politically active friend who is pinging him incessantly, saying, "Hey, you got to get involved, you got to come down," and in the pseudo fantasy of this world, Stacy has sent him a shirt that says "Stand with Black Women" on it, and it arrives in the house, and Dave looks at it, and he doesn't really know what to do. He understands what the words say, but as far as what he's supposed to do with them, he has no idea. So what happens is that he misses the protest. He stays in, he continues to do his own thing and works, but then by a certain point, in part to satisfy, I think, some of his own guilt, maybe even, he takes the shirt, he puts it on, he still doesn't really understand what it means, and he steps out into the wide world, into the point where the protest is gone, it's already done. Mm-hmm. So the only option that's left to Dave is to try and follow through with the standing with Black women that, that's expressed on his shirt, but he misinterprets the instructions somewhat, and he tries to do the thing that I described to you. He tries to approach random Black women on the street and stand next to them, and he as with consequences that you could probably expect if if a slightly creepy white guy just came up to you and stood next to you in a t-shirt that said he was standing next to you. So that's kind of and from there we evolve that idea, and we look at, without fully giving it away, we look at the what happens when you take slogans literally, and that story for Dave evolves, and it intersects with the story of Camila, the Black woman that he runs into first, who finds a way to respond to Dave's literal stances with one of her own.
Great. And so last question from me, and I'll let the team ask you some more industry related things, but before I go away, when we start auditioning for this short, one thing that struck me is that because you're telling a story that straddles comedy and social, making a statement, I think there's a lot of opportunity for actors to also sort of straddle that line, and have comic moments, but also have moments that are meaningful and impactful. What are you looking for, like specifically with the lead character as well, in the performance? Is it something subtle? Is it more like a Buster Keaton type slapstick or something?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, and I was conscious as I was developing this piece that in some ways I'm committing the cardinal sin for a project that's designed to showcase the talents of actors, in that I don't give them a dialogue to play with. And my experience of many actors, when I hand over a script for a feature, they will they'll go through and they'll count how many lines that they have, and that will not be a successful exercise from the point of view of this particular script, because it's not dialogue driven, as you mentioned, Vinay. It's very much driven by physicality. I know that there's a tradition for this in the UK that's maybe a little bit more prominent than in the US, but most of you guys are familiar with Mr. Bean, I would imagine. He's had some big movies over here, and the idea of that character that has a certain sense of innocence, but doesn't actually particularly verbally interact with his environment, but by having an experience that would be out of character to him, shines a bit of a light on it and brings a lot of comedy as well. So I in terms of advice to the actors that would take up this challenge, it's that I would focus on the sense of innocence, because that's actually what brings the sense of empathy to these characters. They're trying to do the right thing. They're all misinterpreting the exercise in a way that derives a lot of comedy, but that so it's not a very slapsticky piece. Nobody's going to be slipping on any banana skins,
right?
it's a lot more about, you know, the well-intentioned attempts of people to follow instructions, and that you know, that key critical misinterpretation of what the purpose of it all is, that brings us the comedy. So it's a big challenge for actors. But I came up in the theatre with people that, you know, trained at the famous Lecoq Clown School in France, and which the kind of physicality that these actors were capable of, and being able to derive comedy from, you know, almost getting to the point of mime.
Right.
It's really calling upon, you know, as a basis, you know, that kind of very classical physical performance that great actors are capable of doing. So hopefully I provide a very different challenge for, you know, for the actors that use this project as a means of as a means of getting the performances out into the world. And I'm really excited to be part of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nick. We're really excited to start casting this and finding the perfect actors, because we think it's a great piece of writing and something that probably should get a lot of attention online, go viral. So we're thrilled to work on that. And I will step back and let my colleagues take it away. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope everyone was interested by our conversation. I hope Nick enjoyed the conversation with us. We will be running a separate podcast, just having a more casual conversation with Nick about some of the pieces of his path to where he got today, and some other motivations behind the story that he's going to be working with Hollywood Casting and Film on. Nick, thank you so much.
No, thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
And we look forward to hearing from everyone, seeing everyone soon. Thank you so much, and we will catch you on the next one.